I thank you, everybody. I apologize again for my English, which is not on the level I would like it to be, and also my physical health is not very good either. So, although you were so nice and cooperative and reacted to my suggestions and positions, and you developed them. I mean, Katerina and others that were discussing my presentation. Thank you very much. I'll try to continue today in the same spirit and with the same limits, and apologize again. In order to resume what we already have done, I try to summarize my psychoanalytic research on feminine identity, which I argue is shaped by bifacial Oedipus or Oedipal diet that leads to a specific ethics of feminine. I get the impression that it would be better that you have the paper in English in order to maybe assume it or discuss it and interpret it in a more available way. My assistants will send the text to Miglena. She will be so nice to give it to all of us, all of you, and maybe it will be useful for not today, but other discussions and utilizations. So based on this, based on what we have talked about yesterday, I'll try to defend today my hyperbolic concept of feminine genius, as I promised yesterday also, by addressing the question, is there a feminine genius? And in the second part of my lesson today, I will discuss my approach to the works of three important female figures, Hannah Arend, Melanie Klein, and the writer Colette. I have written 3 volumes on her works and personalities that exist in English, published by Columbia Press, and maybe some people know them. Of course, I'll summarize this today. My aim is to identify and explore their singularity, of course, but today I'll speak about some common characteristics of these 3 works and persons, common characteristics running through their singular freedom and their singular contributions. Is there feminine genius? For a long time now, and according to the cadence and chance of the necessities of intellectual life, the works of Hannah Arendt, Melanie Klein, and Colette have shed light on and supported my own work and life. Why these women? Because their fields of research, philosophy, psychoanalysis, writing, novelistic writing, essentially by Colette, are fields that I know better than others. The fields where feminine intervention, participation has been noticed in the last times. So this proximity of their fields and minds gave me the courage and the discipline to explore them in my way of thinking and living. So the provocative hyperbole of the term genius was the guiding idea that helped me to understand how these 3 20th century women were able to surpass themselves in their respective fields. I repeat, political philosophy, psychoanalysis, and literature, so as to encourage each reader to surpass him or her in a similar way in following the struggles of Hannah Arendt, of Klein and Colette, and in working on his or her own. So after saying this, I have to clarify that even through this very brief remarks, you understand that what I'll call genius is the singularity. Let me precise it. Remember that the idea of genius has a history, but the last one that we have, it's the romantic comprehension of the genius as a landing of God on earth. In my position, the genius is not the landing of God on earth, but it is the singular expression of the individual creativity, which is maybe the last experience of freedom. So I turn back again to Klein, Arend, and Colette to tell that I'm convinced that the highest realization of human rights and of women's rights is none other than the notion, conception, ideal of the well-known philosopher from the Middle Ages, John Duns Scotus, 1266-1308. So then the Scottish ideal, I would say, that we are now, at this moment in history, in a position to achieve, because it has been said in the Middle Ages, but maybe only now in the democratic societies, whatever their difficulties are, we are in a position to request and maybe to achieve. It is a particular attention paid to what then Scotus called exeitas, from the adverb exe, the demonstrative exe, thisness. Sometimes exeitas is translated into English as the thisness, this man, this woman, nourishing the individual in his or her uniqueness, to what makes an individual who he or she is, and raises him or her above ordinariness. Genius being the most complex, the most appealing, and the most fruitful form of this uniqueness at a particular moment of history, and given that it is so, the form that is lasting and universal because of this uniqueness. One brief passage through somebody to whom me and maybe a lot of you owe to some important works that have preceded our request today, and I mean essentially the work of Beauvoir and her meandering between the situation and the individual potential of the individual, where my notion of genius is situated. Beauvoir between the situation and the individual potential of the individual. Insisting in this manner on the uniqueness that expresses itself in exemplar works, in particular in humanities by field, is also a way of dissociating myself from mass feminism. Women's struggle for emancipation has passed through 3 stages in modern times. First, the demand for political rights led by the suffragettes. Second, by the affirmation of an ontological quality, the ontological equality with men, as against the idea that women are equal but different. which led Simone de Beauvoir in The Second Sex from 1949 to demonstrate the existence and the idea that women are equal but different, which led Simone de Beauvoir to demonstrate the existence and predict the realization of a fraternity between men and women, a fraternity that goes beyond their particular natural difference. And I'll reach another problematic afterwards, in which in the Me Too situation, we don't think only about fraternity, anymore about fraternity, but with some contradictions, abuse, and war between men and women. But stay a little bit with Simone de Beauvoir because of this crossroad between situation and individual potential. And let me insist that this fraternity that Simone de Beauvoir is asking for goes beyond their particular natural differences. And finally, we have the third step in this small and very schematic history of the feminism of the last century. Finally, in the make of May 68 and psychoanalysis, the search for the difference between men and women, which would explain a specific creativity particular to women in the sexual domain and more generally across the whole range of social practices from politics to writing. At each of these stages, the liberation of all womankind has been the objective. In this respect, the feminists have not departed from the totalizing ambitions of the various libertarian movements that arose out of Enlightenment philosophy. And if we go further back, that were the result of the dissolution of the religious continent that these movements struggled to realize the paradisical teleology here in this world, with their rebellious negativity going through this paradisical teleology, but also wishing to achieve it in the paradisical society. Today, we know only too well the dead end which this totalizing and totalitarian promise lead. Feminism to itself, whatever various currents may exist in Europe and America, has not escaped this tendency. As a result, it has hardened into an inconsequential form of political activism that, ignorant of the uniqueness of individual subjects, believes that it can encompass all womankind, like all the proletarian or the entire third world, within a set of demands that are as passionate as they are desperate. However, we have to recognize that its most illustrious source of inspiration, Beauvoir, was far from underestimating the subject in women or individual. In her, that fell an undefined need to transcend itself. We have a contradiction in Beauvoir writing. From the one hand, she examines the condition in which appears femininity and her need to freedom, and she, the author Beauvoir, considers that there is in the women subject an undefined need to transcend itself, a singular tendency, particularity, characteristic, subjective mystery of freedom, transformation, which is not transformative family, but something in this sphere. Faithful to this approach emanating from existential morality and appropriating Marxism according to her own lights, Beauvoir, the philosopher, endeavored to liberate women from her inferior status, which compels her to the other of men, to be the other of men. She wanted to liberate uh, the woman from uh, her position to be the other of men, who has neither the right nor the opportunity to form an other herself. She submitted to the otherness of men, denied the possibility of forming her own project or of transcending herself. Woman, thus determined by the history of society dominated by man, is consigned to immanence, immobilized as an object, since her transcendence, in Beauvoir's words, is perpetually transcended by another essential and sovereign conscience. End of quote. While never ceasing to oppose the biological reduction of woman, one isn't born woman, one becomes one, Beauvoir never lost her rage against metaphysics because, consigning her to the realm of facticity and of immanence, refusing her access to the status of humanity, that of autonomy and of freedom. Woman had never be autonomy and freedom. She is in the facticity and the immanence. This is the metaphysics that condemns her to this. And as far as you think in the realm of metaphysics, you cannot but cross this slavery position of femininity in the realm of philosophy, heritated by metaphysics. However, by putting to one side the question of difference and focusing on equality, Beauvoir denied herself the possibility of pursuing her existentialist agenda, which she had, however, announced and which would no doubt have led her to reflect via the consideration of women in general upon the possibility of freedom of each one of them as a unique human being. I quote this, which escapes maybe from Beauvoir's acute consciousness of the uniqueness of her own thinking, but which is quite appealing for us in her work. I quote her. The tragedy of woman consists in the conflict between the fundamental demands of each subject who posits herself essential and the demands of a situation in terms of which is inessential. How, in the feminine condition, can a human being arrive at fulfillment? At fulfillment, which means at autonomy and freedom. This is to say, by concerning ourselves with the possibility open to the individual, we will not be defining this possibility of term and happiness, continues Beauvoir, but in terms of freedom. In order to think in terms of freedom, we have to escape from the ultimate definition of humanity by the situation and try to speak about the subjectivation, the genius, in my words, the singularity, the excitas. Indeed, although Beauvoir's thought is frequently inspired by the achievements of individual women, women as subject, this very fruitful contradiction in thinking, the examples of genius ranging from Saint Teresa or Colette to Mademoiselle de Gournay or Théroigne de Méricourt, it is less to the human being or to individual possibilities that the second sex is devoted than to the condition of womankind, because it was through the transformation of the condition of women in general that its author saw the possibility of individual autonomy and feminine creativity realizing itself, such possibilities of the individual may remain, nevertheless, in her opinion, the principal historical objective. But for her period of history, her own development as a woman, it was most important, maybe the only possible situation, to stress better the conditions than the singularity. Nevertheless, it is far from, for me, it is far from obvious that the conflict between the condition of humankind as a whole and the self-realization of each individual woman, which, according to Beauvoir, is at the root of women's suffering, can be resolved if we concern ourselves only with the condition and neglect the importance of the subject. By focusing on the transformation of the feminine condition, Beauvoir herself leads us away from the essential question of individual projects and consigns to the shadows the issue of the indeterminate possibilities arising from the exceitas, or the fundamental uniqueness of each individual, according to Duns Scott's Arend, Klein, Colette. To coming back again to them, Arend, Klein, and Colette, and many others, did not wait for the feminine condition to be ripe in order to exercise their freedom. Is not genius precisely the breakthrough that consists in going beyond the situation? To appeal to the genius in each individual, after these considerations, if you allow me to continue, to appeal to the genius in each individual is not to underestimate the weight of history. These three women faced up the history as much as well as anyone others, with courage and a sense of realism. But it is, for me, to attempt to free the feminine condition, and more generally the human condition, from the constraints of biology, society, and destiny, by placing the emphasis on the importance of the conscious or unconscious initiative of the subject, faced with the program dictated by these various determinism, biology, society, and destiny, to continue to take into account these constraints, but to stress the conscious and unconscious initiative, the risk of the freedom that subject faced with the program dictated by the various determinisms. Isn't subjective initiative at the end this highly personal force, tiny yet irreducible, on which depends the possibility of deconstructing any given condition? By focusing on the irreducible subjectivity of these three women, on the uniqueness of the creativity of each one of them, my study has been concerned with their individual possibilities, to use Beauvarian words, their individual possibilities in what again, terms of their freedom, to use again Beauvoir's own vocabulary. Moreover, leaving aside our differences, I firmly believe that I am retrieving and developing an essential question raised by the second sex, the Beauvoir, that due to historical circumstances and her own existentialist convictions, Beauvoir had to leave unanswered, non-answered, namely, the problematic is how through the feminine condition, she didn't elaborate in a more clear way this contradiction and this question that I formulated as follows: how through the feminine condition can woman fulfill her being, her individual potential in terms of freedom, which is the modern meaning of happiness? It will be seen then in formulating my own work in these terms, I wish to express as well as I can my debt to Beauvoir through the critique that I'm formulating today with you, my debt to Beauvoir, that pioneer feminist who is all too often unjustified, criticized, or underestimated. And I dedicate my 3-volume work to her, through and against and contrary to the discussion that I develop, that I sketch today with you. So it would be necessary to draw a list of the qualities shared by Arend, Klein, and Colette with the aim of defining feminine genius. Uh, uh, I shall speak about their uniqueness, uh, and this uniqueness will appear as sharing the uniqueness of the other person, whatever her field of research is different from the previous one. But this crossing of uniqueness doesn't swallow, doesn't erase the uniqueness itself. Uniqueness by its very essence cannot be subjected to comparison. It's not something that is repeatedly identical from one individual to another. Nevertheless, there are some similarities in the life history of these 3 women, and I will come back to this point. But before I do, and in the absence of real treatise on female sexuality, I should at least clarify the second term of my title, which I have left unexplained until now, and the hope that its meaning would make itself clear to the various experiences of these 3 geniuses, namely, what is the feminine? Let's keep in mind the definition, psychoanalytical and philosophical, that I tried to present you yesterday. What is the feminine? And then let us think about the practical and individual incarnations, realizations of this generality of the feminine in the individual and socially, historically conditioned experiences. Is it possible to define neither woman nor womankind, but a feminine particularity that is different in each? This one could speak of the feminine aspect of woman and feminine aspect of men, and for each individual person, and to do without confining the feminine in the concept of other or in that which defies representation, as some say to do. Without going so far as to propose a systematic theory, my previous work in psychoanalysis has tried to answer this question by approaching the feminine from the perspective of the various symptoms or psychological structures that I have been able to analyze in treating my male and female patients. But given the background of the study of these 3 women, and in the framework of our lessons in this school, I would like to develop and to continue to um, widen with your contributions my crossroad between theory and clinic, history and individuality, in order to approach the existential and cultural experiences of Arend, Klein, and Colette, who had left their own mark and have led me to refine and even to alter my conceptions of these questions. Uh, so, this general introduction of what I wanted to approach more concretely today gives me now to present the second part of this lecture of today, which will be the presentation of some particularities of these three women and their works, and how these particularities are nevertheless common and differently common for these three women. I'm sure that maybe there will be some difficulties to follow the details of my endeavoring in the psyche and works of these three women for those who have never read them or never read my own works on them. But I hope also that trying to summarize and simplify my analysis, we could follow me in the travel between the common characteristics of these three women. Beyond the incommensurable differences and the originality of these three oeuvres that I have surveyed in the triptych, and I will invite you to follow them in the English translation of this volume. There are some common features. I'll comment on three of them today. The first one concerns the object relation. How Hannah Arendt, Melanie Klein, and Colette, in their different works, different epistemological, historical, and stylistic realization, have something common in their positionment to the object relation. Object relation is a word that refers to a psychoanalytic approach, but it has also common generalized acceptation. The otherness. What is the position of the speaking woman, Klein, Colette, and Arend, as far as the otherness, the first object, the object of work, of love, of existence is concerned. How is this expressed in the works of my three authors? Let me start with Arend. Keen to defend the uniqueness of who and individual. So those who know, have read Arend, know how for her the uniqueness of who and individuals is the best resistance to totalitarians, and she developed this in some other contexts, but this is one of them. You know how essential for her is this notion of uniqueness of who and individuals. Although she's very keen to defend the uniqueness of who and individuals, which is threatened by various forms of totalitarianism, Klein nevertheless does not seek refuge in solipsistic incantations. She's, on the contrary, very critical and very furious even against the isolation of the philosophers, man philosophers, that she derided as a melancholic tribe from Plato to Kant and to Heidegger, and against the anonymity of the crowd, the they. In France, we have a pronoun which is on a dit, on, they, which is more anonymous than they. But Heidegger uses this term. It's very known by philosophers, the situation and position of the they in men's philosophy. So she criticizes this anonymity into which the multitude of anonymous individuals melt. Hannah Arendt, who defines herself, who characteristics herself as a political journalist and don't want to belong to this melancholic tribe of philosophers, men philosophers. She likes to call herself political journalist precisely to not be confused with those melancholic individuals tribe, makes an appeal for a political life in which the originality of each individual is guaranteed through the creation of what she calls a web of human relationships, consisting of memory and narrative destined for others. The place of the narrative as crystallization of the otherness, of singularity, and a way to make transitional situation possible for this individuality, a web of narrative. This realization of the who of the individual in the web of attachment that unite particular individuals is a distinctive feature of Arendian political thought. At one and the same time, intensely libertarian and eminently social. You are unique, but you are linked to the others. The otherness defines your uniqueness, is a condition for your uniqueness, and therefore to which paradoxically both the most eccentric anarchists and the most conservative spirits can subscribe. It is not simply a reversal of idealist philosophy onto the terrain of sociology, nor just a tribute to Aristotle as a counterpoint to Plato, that we should read into this transvaluation of political lies, but rather the conviction of Arend, a conviction which I consider as ontological, also as an existential one, that what is unique in each individual remains hidden, she says, to the person himself, and does not appear so clearly and unmistakably as it does to others. The uniqueness appears to the others. So the place of the object is indissociable of what the subject is. The subject appears in the others and not in the closeness and the retirement, the melancholic eye. This kind of positionment on the origin of the uniqueness is expressed in other framework, but with, I think, the same intensity and the same meaning in Klein, the same meaning as a transmission in the field in which Klein works, but in different construction and conceptual framework. Concerning Klein, we may say that she radically transforms the Freudian hypothesis of an original narcissism and postulates, and this is the introduction, it's very, very new and very surprising of Klein in the framework of psychoanalytic thinking. She postulates from the very beginning of the baby psyche, not a narcissism, but a self capable, I'm quoting, of a relationship with the object, albeit partial. For instance, the partial object is the breast, before the child becomes capable of constructing an object relation to the total object following the depressive position. Even if the whole link to the object as a whole exists problematically at the beginning, but follows a sort of evolution, neurological and family context depending. Even from the very beginning, taking into account the relationship of the baby to the breast, Klein insists that the self is capable of a relationship with an object from the beginning and that narcissism doesn't exist. One consideration is prior to all others for this new psychoanalyst in the field of original psychoanalytic movement. The psyche does not exist and is inconceivable in the absence of the self that she postulates along with its correlative, which is the relationship to the object. There is no self without an object, and the object is there from the beginning. What about Colette, the lover? Colette was repeatedly betrayed in her love life, and who indeed was often herself the betrayer, but she finally declares herself to be beyond the passion of life. I quote very often this sentence by Colette, the lover who criticizes and abandons apparently love. She says the following: love, one of the great banalities of existence, takes leave of mine. Once we have left it behind us, we notice that elsewhere is gay, diverse, and plentiful. End of quote. Make no mistake, this comment ought not to be seen as the prologue to a melancholic report on existence. Thanks to her friendship and through the discipline of writing, in which she immersed herself, forgetting herself in the act of rediscovering unity, in the pure experience of being, Colette never renounced her participation in the plurality of this world, which is celebrated in a kind of pagan mysticism of self-realization through a multitude of cosmic relations. Love doesn't exist anymore, but she had a relationship with flowers, sun, water, wind, and had whatever event in the surrounding world. Thus, when she says, all else is gay, diverse, and plentiful, this should be interpreted as a modulation of human love beyond the love in a couple, not a love for God, but an osmosis with being. In this affirmation of a self that cannot be separated from its various attachments, political, psychical, sensory, amorous, or literary, I would be tempted to distinguish a constant of feminine psychosexuality. A woman is less cut off in her erotic pleasures and more dependent on the other, whether this other is an imaginary vehicle of the psyche or of a real needed presence. We may venture to say that a woman has a greater inclination than a man to seek and to nurture, in the context of her attachments, that which permits the flourishing of what is unique in her, rather than that which in this attachment restrains and suppresses her pleasure. What allows the nourishing of the uniqueness, rather than which in these attachments restrains and suppresses her pleasure. And that while constantly rebelling against all kinds of fetters, constraints, prisons, camps, and other concentrations of the social that reduce her to a condition of banality, woman never ceases, in spite of the obstacles, to seek in the context of an attachment to an object that is gay, diverse, and plentiful, the condition of her political and psychical liberty. Critical, heated, unhappy, but energetic in maintaining the link. Psychical liberty is in creating links. This is the first community between the singularity of these three fields and these three subjectivities. The second common characteristic of our three geniuses is their identification of thought with life. Thought is life, life is thinking. I begin again with Arend. By diagnosing a radical evil in totalitarianism, which dared to announce the superfluity of human life, I'm quoting from Arend, she set herself up as the champion of life, if and only if life is and has a meaning. Life is not a zoe, but is a bios, uh, biography, and not physiology, anatomy, but energy, physics, and meaning, hence bios, giving rise to a biography that becomes part of the memory of the city-state. Through an investigation of the meandering paths of the acts of willing, thinking, and judging, I'm quoting of one of her well-known books, Arend attempts to understand the meaning of an existence such as this, in which life is coexisting with thought, and which the two versions of totalitarianism of the 20th century started to destroy in order to annihilate with thought life itself. Fascism, communism, Gulag society exterminated thinking, freedom of thinking, any thinking which is already freedom, it's banished and deleted, and the life is exterminated consequently. Deeply shocked, but retaining a sense of humor, Arendt even manages to make fun of Eichmann, who banalized, trivialized evil, not by committing trivial crimes, and some have said that it is implied in what she says, but because he was incapable of distinguishing good from evil, because he had the sad capacity to console himself with cliché, which is closely linked to his inability to think, in particular to think from another person's point of view. Here in this meditation of Arendt about Eichmann, you have the essentiality of the other's point of view and the essentiality of this otherness for thinking, which is the possibility to make judgments, to announce thinking from the other point of view, which is the real notion of thinking, not calculating, but experiencing logic and stylistic through the point of view of the otherness. Arend transformed her political struggle against totalitarianism into a philosophical struggle to defend thought, not thought in the sense of calculation, of instrumental rationality, but questioning thought, savoring thought, forgiving thought. As far as Klein is concerned, about this identification of life and thinking, I found it in the fact that Klein is the founder of child psychoanalysis. Klein did not simply barter eroticism, which Freud had placed at the center of psychic life, for the pain of the newly born child that she supposes to be schizoparanoid and then depressive. Klein's critics have often thought that this was the case, that she was not interested by eroticism, but also even uniquely by the pain in the child. This is not the case, and Lacan, uh, who is quite clear in his recommendation to learn and to invite even Klein to his lectures, called her in a very humoristic attitude a delightful tribe butcher, because he supposed that maybe you can criticize her about her bartering of eroticism, but I'll not follow Lacan in this direction. He was envying and great envy has characterizes his attitude toward Klein. She focused on the problem of childhood and in particular on child psychosis, and this was something very new, the pain prevailing on eroticism, which handicaps the cognitive faculties, cognitive thinking. Klein was the first to use psychoanalysis as an art of curing the capacity to think. She was not a tribe butcher. She was the healer of the ability to think. Bion, Winnicott, and many others who followed her and often disregarded, often disagreed with her views, continued to innovate in terms of her practice by making it increasingly sensitive to the condition of possibility of the human mind, so as to optimize its creative capacities. The actuality and the future of psychoanalysis consists, in my mind, the capacity to accompany the capacity to think, and this is what Winnicott and Bion have done, and others in French psychoanalysis particularly do. Now, what about Colette and this possibility to identify life with thinking? It was not only out of vanity that Colette declared herself to be a stranger to literary art. Was it then out of a refusal to imprison herself in the fetish of the literary object or in the ritual of the literary milieu? No doubt it was, but she was far from having avoided the social and aesthetic traps whose perverse effects she was hardly against. However, as a writer, she does not use words rhetorically or in a quest for pure form, or still less as a means of communicating ideas. If we may say that she thinks as she writes, then it is in the sense that these written thoughts herself emerge as a new life that bring her beyond a new self and a new body into a real osmosis with being. Her writing is sensual, gustatory, and sonorous, fragrant and tactile, uh, is thought made flesh, thought made flesh, or flesh made thought. It's difficult to express this in their language, but let me just present in French one of her description of the flower rose. Rose, noire, confiture, d'odeur. The expression of the representation of the rose as a jelly of smelling is done in the pronunciation, in the work of the mouth and the respiration uh, and the body itself in the pronunciation. Colette does not invent a literary form. She constructs an alphabet of the sensory world by weaving and by feeding on the fabric of the French language. Is she a novelist, a writer? Of course she is, but she has an indomitable energy that never tires of reconstructing the flesh of the world in her mother's language. And the role of her mother, Sido, is very important for this appropriation of language from the childish language, from the apprentices of the language through phonemes, words, respiration, articulation, mouth, and breathing. In these very different ways, none of these three women simply places thinking or sublimation in the center of life. For them, life is thought, and thought is life, and in this way they attain the highest scale of felicity, in which to live is to think, sublimate, write. The metaphysical dichotomy between abstract and concrete, meaning and what and matter, being and existence dissolves in their experience, and it does in their thought. Is this an echo of the Christian belief in reincarnation that I read into these adventures in modernity, which, however, purport to be entirely secular, uh, verb and flesh, language and sexuality, sensuality? Or is it not rather another instance of a resonance with female sexuality, which I sketched yesterday, and which is reluctant to isolate itself in the obsessional palaces of pure thought, in the abstraction of the superego, or in the male phallic mastery of a logical calculation, although many women are capable of such absurd performances, deemed as male precisely through identification with a male, but not only. Does the feminine prefer, on the contrary, the poetic regions of thought, where meaning is rooted in the world of the senses, where representations of words run alongside representations of things, and where ideas give way to instinctual drives? Now I have to uh, reach my third point, and it will be the end of this second lesson. The third common characteristics of my three geniuses is their approach to temporality. Without having experienced maternity herself, Arend attributed a nodal function to the temporality of birth in her ideas about freedom. It is because men are born strangers and ephemeral, that freedom, which is the very possibility of starting anew, can be given its ontological foundation. I'm quoting, this freedom is identical with the fact that men are because they are born, that each of them is a new beginning, begins in a way a new world, end of quote. In contrast, terror eliminates the very source of freedom, quote, which man receives from the fact of his birth and which resides in the fact of his capacity of being a new beginning. Arend didn't deny that the temporality of concern and the temporality of death made an important contribution of the development of thought. But to this, she adds when reflections inspired by St. Augustine and Nietzsche and enriched by her own experience of the 20th century society and culture. These new conceptions are based on a new conception of time, the time of new beginning, of renewal. Uh, Now, what about Colette? About Klein, of course, let's maintain this triad in the range that I choose for today. Thanks to her analysis with Ferenczi and Abraham, the depressive Klein, this is very strange to accept, but she began her analysis because she was depressed. The depressive Klein was born again into a new existence as a psychoanalyst. She became psychoanalyst. Her psychoanalysis gave her a real new life. Moreover, by renouncing the German language and seeking new theoretical inspiration in English in the context of British psychoanalysis, she reinforced the countertransferential involvement of the analyst. This was one of her most important findings. What is the place of the analyst in the transference? There is a countertransference from the part of analyst to not only the patient, but the analyst is in a sort of analysis. He or she continue to renew his own life, psychic life, through the countertransference. Some accuse her by using suggestions, violence, of making intrusions into the malleable psyche of her young patients. There was no lack of criticism, some of it justified. But in reality, in her infantile fantasies, Klein put herself at the service of child who came to consult her. Thanks to this, unconscious projections, but nevertheless remaining sensitive to the patient's intimacy, she manages to name the unnameable trauma of the other, to name the trauma in the child's world, because she renewed the child by renewing herself in the world of the child. Freud practiced transference and countertransference without making explicit what he was doing. And it was the female disciples of Klein, not Klein herself, who theorized the analyst countertransference. It was Klein who revealed the need for this projection at the source of the interpretation. By showing the child in the analyst to be reborn, she created the possibility for the child in each of us to reemerge. And then it was Winnicott, another attentive critic and student of Klein, who considered analysis itself as a perpetual rebirth of the subject. Beyond biological destiny and the weight of family, rebirth becomes possible for each one of us. Freud left us a conception of conscious as a atemporal, zeitlos. Through the play of transfer and countertransference, Klein and the post-Kleinian offer us a new conception of the temporality of analysis as a new beginning, as a rebirth. And now what about Colette? Colette avoided dwelling on the inevitability of death and said that she preferred to celebrate birth with her mother, Sido, and she frequently used the image of hatching, uh, l'éclosion, hatching flowers, not death. That is not interesting. She's annoyed by that. But hatching was at the same time the more drastic, dramatic event and the more needing to adhere to it. All my life, I'm quoting, I have been interested in birth, and more so than in any other manifestation of life. That's where the essential drama of existence is situated in hatching, in birth, to a far greater degree than in death, which is no more than a banal defeat. So the blooming of the cactus rose, the budding of plants, the birth of children, this woman who was herself far from being a model mother, found above all in writing this rhythm that she made her own. This is the rhythm of the infinite in the sense, mm, let me find my, in the sense of what this pagan mystic that is Colette is experiencing and living. Uh, be, However, beyond all these common features, but also in and of themselves, what has interested me during the time I have spent with these three women, I would like to repeat, not what they have in common with all women, but how each of them, against this shared background, managed to negotiate an original and unprecedented advantage in their rhetoric, in their own thinking. By paying particular attention to singular mm, differences, sexual differences, uh, philosophical and literary differences, my investigation of female genius has led me, in short, to go beyond the dichotomy of sexes and to distance myself from the initial presupposition of a binary sexual system. I would like to finish with this because uh, my attitude to the binary sexual system is not the gender studies, but uh, another approach which stress the excitas, the singularity, mm, and the shareability of the singularity. This has been made possible not only because psychical bisexuality seemed to me to be a fact that applies to both sexes, with the dominant factor varying between sexes and between individuals, nor is it possible just because each individuality constructing sexual identity deviates from some standards. These factors are relevant, but finally and most importantly, what allows us to overcome the traditional binary model of sexuality is the fact that creativity, when developed to the full ingenious, pushes this deviation from the standard to the further limits and to the highest degree of uniqueness, which is nevertheless something that can be shared. At the heart of the precarious solitude of their pioneering work, which is the price they paid for their unique creativity, Klein, Arend, and Colette managed to create the conditions that give rise to a necessarily public opinion, and why not a school, and at best create an effect of seduction that solicits a communion of reading and a community of readers. The sexual, social, and political liberation of women and their entry into various intellectual professional domains in the modern polity raises the question of their equality or their difference with regard to men. This was the central question of the 20th century. However, the third millennium will be the millennium of individual opportunities, or it will not be. Here I am making an allusion to André Malraux, who famously said that the 21st century will be a spiritual century or will not be. I have tried in my 3-volume study to go beyond a well-worn approach to these questions, which sought to define fixed sexual identities. And beyond the sexual polymorphism that is already appearing in the global era, to the extent that is raising questions concerning not only our identity, but also the idea of the couple and the natural procreation, I would like to think that each individual invents his or her sex in the domain of intimacy, and therein lies genius, which is quite simply creativity. So, is there a feminine genius? The example of 20th century women has made in is made it difficult to avoid the question. And it has led us to consider that the anxiety over the feminine has been the communal experience which has allowed our civilization to reveal in a new way the incommensurability of the individual. This incommensurability is rooted in sexual experience, but nonetheless is realized to the risk of each of us to prepare to take, is realized to the risk that each of us is prepared to take by calling into question thought, language, one's own age, and any identity that resides in them. You are a genius to the extent that you are able to change the socio-biological conditions of your identity. This is the legacy of Arend, Klein, and Colette. Thank you. Thank you very much. Be unique in your sexuality. You have the possibility to be unique through your creativity. And this is what I wanted to share with you today. Thank you very much.